Hi there and welcome to episode 71 of the Analyst Brief podcast brought to you by the Cyberhut. My name is Simon Moffatt, founder and analyst at the Cyberhut, and with me as ever is co-host Mr. David Mahdi. Dave, how are we doing?
Fantastic. Happy to finally be home after nearly 4 weeks on the road and bumping into you at RSA last week.
Wow, 4 weeks isn't that's impressive. That's impressive. I was a mere week away or 6 days away last week, but we did randomly randomly bumped into a street near the Moscow Centre, as you do, as 43,000 people descend on San Francisco. It's often a case of you do randomly walk along and just startled to meet people that So we did have a quick catch up there last week, but I guess it's a few days after RSA announced, whatever, Tuesday, Wednesday, after, and the dust has probably started to settle a little bit. But I guess let's do an RSA quick post conference review and initial thoughts there, Dave. What was your immediate takeaway before we start riffing away on the broader RSA or RSAC as it is now, I should say, sort of set of events?
No, thank you. I think that's great. Number one, on a personal note, I was totally oversubscribed on this one. Booked too many meetings, too close together, overlapping, you name it. Every night was bananas, I'm sure, for most people. But I think I was able to accomplish what I set out for, sitting on some panels, getting some critical meetings, and just getting some of the insight. I think my biggest takeaway was, continuing again that identity trend. I mean, we came into this year, as we've talked on previous episodes of the podcast, of all the acquisitions and everything else. And I had some conversations with some folks like, yeah, well, that's like old news. I'm like, no, it's not old news, because it's like you're just at the beginning of it. And we now need to see the execution of identity security as the control plane within cybersecurity platforms and other areas. So I think we're seeing that. The biggest elephant in the room, and I know you've got a lot to say here, is obviously AI. And unlike last year, which had a lot of AI stuff, this year was Agentic AI, and we secure AI, right? And it was just everywhere. And your awesome post there on the Cyberhut, even those pictures, it's just like there were robots in the street. And of course, San Francisco being like overwhelmed by Waymos, which I took my first one because I just wanted to try it out. It was very interesting. I enjoyed it, but that's another conversation. I think that was the biggest takeaway. But there's certainly a couple. There's definitely one big light bulb that went off. I think last week for me, and certainly I think we can dive into it. But that was kind of my overall sense. And lastly, just trying to just cut through all that AI noise and, we secure AI.
Yeah.
What does that actually mean? Because that's just like saying, we secure, the digital world. Like, okay, cool. But you're at the RSA conference and there's hundreds of other vendors here, 40,000 people. Tell us what you actually do. Do you provide the tires on the car? Right? Do you provide the hubcaps? Do you provide an entire car? Like, what do you actually do in that value chain? And it's like, you don't need nonsense messaging at RSA. These are targeted people here that know the space. And like you said on that great post, this is the 35th edition. We shouldn't have to use these silly terms anymore. Just say, we secure AI prompts. We secure, AI. Just say that. Anyway, I'll stop there.
No, look, there's so much to unravel. And I'm with you a little bit. I was a bit frustrated in some respects. I guess, yes, thousands of people and every vendor, it was talking about AI, but it was often so generic. And I think, ironically, it really gets in the way of the vendors who are doing some really, really fascinating, interesting, useful, durable security in this space. And I think for me, a quick review, and the things that we talk about frequently is that AI is not all the same, first of all, like the cloud or like mobile, lots of different flavors of it. But back to your point, there are multiple different avenues of detection, protection, security controls at all parts of that end-to-end lifecycle. No one vendor does all of that stuff. So I guess the counterpoint to what you're saying there is, if you look at the traditional sort of data guys, whatever, doing DLP and all the rest of it, they've evolved in that they're looking at how data is going to feed into the models or whatever that could be. And clearly all of the identity world is saying, well, Agentic needs a new identity type, and that makes sense. But then the endpoint and security operations, they've all got, I guess, skin in the game as well, because we're talking about behavior monitoring, or we're talking about how the sort of UX is being used to gain access to the agents, MCP models, everything else. So that there's definitely lots of different moving parts, but I think there's legitimately lots of different actors who can protect, detect, and do all the rest of it with AI. So it isn't just let's talk about agents. It's definitely a broader thing. And then not to forget, look, what's this AI stuff being used for? So it has to link to business. It has to be measured. Some good conversations about the compliance angle as well. We talk about sort of IGA and PAM and these sorts of things being, I guess, re-energized by AI. Will a compliance regulator or an external auditor for SOX or for GDPR or whatever sign off on an agent who's gone through and remediated a load of access or confirmed, a privacy impact assessment or whatever? And today, if I'm honest, I don't think they would. I'm hoping, and I think I can see the compliance angle evolving massively and saying, actually, do you know what? If there is an agent on my behalf and it's structured correctly and there's transparency and there's real explainability around what an agent's doing, I think the compliance thing will catch up. But I think 100%, there was a lot of generic statements, which was frustrating. I think there's a lot of people should be involved. And people, I mean, different vendor stakeholders involved here, adding value. But we need to crispen up what, as you say, what are you specifically doing and how is it measurable?
Exactly. I mean, I think it's just like we went through this with cloud. We went through this with zero trust. And I think although with zero trust, it's been, in a sense, in my view, reset, but the elements are still permeate, the market. And there was a link that's been floating around. I think, Simon, it's one of the things we didn't talk about ahead of this, but it was this RSA, the Great Cooking. I don't know. Have you seen that?
No, I don't know. No, go explain.
Yeah. So I think we can post a link up, but some people put together a website and they went over all of the RSA exhibitors and they basically said, are you cooked? Meaning, are you done? If you take the notion of Claude Code, and they basically said, like, cooked, almost, or moat for now, and then very difficult for Claude to do it. Okay, so a couple things. It's been floating around, and I don't know if there's been LinkedIn posts or what have you, but just to call it out here and connect it to what you were saying. Again, it's all this AI buzz. Number one, it's too early to tell exactly what AI is going to do. We can predict what it's going to do, but anyone that is thinking it's going to do all these certain things now today, I think some things will be right, but I think they're going to have a lot more that's wrong. And we saw this with cloud, we saw this with zero trust, and we are going to see it again with this. So to your point, I think vendors themselves are still trying to figure out product market fit, and the market is changing so quickly.
Yeah.
That means the products have to change so quickly. We've never been used to this pace of change before, ever, right? So moats are created and moats are destroyed very rapidly. But my question is, when I look at this are you cooked thing, number one, to me, it looks like they scraped the web to get descriptions of the vendors. And then they had like, can Claude Code do this? Can you vibe code, what this particular vendor does? Yes, 100%. But it's not going into the details of like, okay, you can code it and have V1 right now today and it works. What's it going to be like tomorrow? How are you going to maintain it? And I can tell you, I would love to argue with anybody. I've been using AI. I built like a cool AI fitness tool that I personally use. It is not reliable. And I use it I do like 1,000 prompts a day in it. It is not reliable. It has gotten slower. I tried to use the voice stuff a lot. I tried to use it in my car this morning. It just didn't work. Whereas like a week ago, it did. It is not reliable. So anyone who's like laying off thousands of people and saying they can do AI, yeah, I don't think so. Some of the companies that are doing that now, I'm seeing quality issues in their products. I'm not going to name names, but this is the big fallacy in our industry. So I'll get off that soapbox. But I think with what you're saying to me on the positive side, we're in the innovation area now. It's now for startups and vendors to kind of look at the market and innovate. And I think, Simon, I want to hear your thoughts on the sandbox stuff, because unfortunately I wasn't able to make it. But one vendor I encountered was Neon Security. They're in stealth. But when I looked at what they were doing, it's like, if we look at how identity is this control plane, there's so many facets of identity. And their thesis, without going into details, is like, we just need to be able to get visibility on all the major pillars of access management, IGA and PAM, and be able to bring those together and allow any of the practitioners to be able to own all the downstream integrations, all of the actions that are happening, and get that singular view as best as you can of everything. In a sense, to me, it sounded like orchestration, which I think there are elements of that. But I'm like, okay, that's really cool. And then I go back and look at what you're talking about with governance and compliance and regulations. And it's like, again, I think we're so early in that we're going to see some really cool things. So I think anyone who's leaning too hard into AI right now, they're going to have to rip and replace stuff, because the models are changing so fast. The stuff I've personally built that I use, I know I have to go back and modify it. But again, I modify it, and maybe 2 weeks from now, they change the model. Can I rely on it anymore? So anyway, I think it's really exciting, but I'm also like, cautiously optimistic is not the word, but I guess maybe it's the most accurate, Simon. I don't know.
I think there's so much to unpick. And I think I always like to try and take a bit of a sort of zoom out, take sort of economic look at this sort of stuff. And can AI help with some of our identity or cybersecurity problems? Absolutely, 100%. And it will remove some problems. It will make some things obsolete. It will automate and make things efficient. You talked about sort of connectivity in IGA and PAM. Absolutely. And I think we see this. I think you've got to caveat that around, give this sort of AI or the agents that you're developing and using very focused niche areas, specific problems. I think that's the key as well, isn't it? You can't expect it to do everything. So I agree. I think it is going to be very difficult to build an entire end-to-end application or a system or a platform. But if you say, do you know what, I'm stuck on this bit, and be focused and targeted, absolutely. I think there's automation to be had there, intelligent automation. I just want to bring up that I before we dive into the tech, I there's a panel on the last day which really I really enjoyed. Actually, it was with it was investor VC panel with Dave DeWalt, who was a former ForgeRock investor, part of the Night Dragon. He founded Night Dragon, and invested in all sorts of stuff. And what was really interesting on this panel was they were obviously VCs, so they're looking at return on investment. Well, where's the next big thing with AI, and what's going to come out of there? And they made some interesting observations, really, around, not dissimilar to what you said, but from a slightly different angle, around the models themselves are things that hold the cards right now. So all of the model laboratories, they're building stuff up. But as you say, it's like a flywheel. It's like next week it'll be entirely different, probably better, hopefully. But it's like breaking changes. It's like breaking changes. Every time you build an application or are relying on a particular version, that changes. And everything downstream, maybe it should, maybe it shouldn't. But it's like an API change where all of your relying parties suddenly break. So that is very volatile at the minute. And I think I don't see any end to that sort of cycle of development for all of the big guys who are building models and stuff like that at the minute.
Well, I was just going to say, Simon, it's also from a human analogy point. It's like, if I rely on you as my main industry analyst, right? And we have bi-weekly calls where we just talk, and I say, hey, I have, I own vendor X and I'm tackling this AI security market. Simon, give me insights. And I also want your advisory, right? And, we get used to it. And I know when you know me and I know you, and we start working together and we have that flow, right? This is what my life was like as a Gartner analyst for nearly 7 years as well. Now imagine the analogy here is like, you're a different person now every time I talk to you, and you maybe know bits and pieces of my history. You might be smarter in some ways, but like, your responses back to me are different now. Now, me as a business, I'm always expecting to get certain, certain formats of information from you, aka some of the API controls and the data that comes back. But from a human standpoint, it's like your service is changing every time I have a meeting with you, and the reliability isn't there. Right? The consistency of the advice you're giving me starts to, be really good one week and terrible the next week. that's been my experience in using all of these models now, going back almost 2 years. Is I've, and if you go on Reddit and follow some of the or jump in some of the subreddits on AI, various ones, you see people complain. And sometimes I'll get an alert on my phone on Reddit about one of the channels. I jump in and I'm like, oh no, like there's been a big change to Gemini, and I built a lot of stuff on Gemini personally and professionally. And then I go in and I'm like, yep, this is just not working. Or I have to go in and build new prompts in the back end to actually get it to, give me proper answers. And there's a lot of correction I've had to do, over the weeks. And I see this corroborated with people out there. So anyway, so I think that's really good that the VCs are seeing that.
Let's continue this forward though. So I agree. Yeah. I think that probably isn't in discussion really. But what does that really mean? So what does that mean if the models have to hold the cards and the downstream systems change? Two things spin out. One, feature innovation becomes cheap. So what does that mean? Well, if you're an Okta, a Ping, a ForgeRock, whoever, an established company, CrowdStrike, Cisco, whoever, and you think, do you know what, we need some feature X, which maybe two or 3 years ago we would have had to have organically built, which is really expensive. Or you take a punt on a startup and you say, do you know what, 20, 30, 50 million, I'll go and buy that stuff in, rebrand it, stick it onto my platform. We've done an acqui-hire, we've got some smart developers, some early stage tooling, we're done. Now, the panel actually amplified and said that will slow down to a halt because it's so much easier to build point features now. You can talk about Claude and other ways of doing stuff, or you can just use agents internally to automate your way out of a situation so you don't need to keep buying and extending. You can just simply build stuff quicker. Now, if you carry on through that analogy, what happens? Well, doing your basic economics 101 from 30 years ago, you simply end up with really platforms who are not differentiated technically. So the feature differentiation collapses because on Monday, if Microsoft release a particular feature, you can probably guarantee by Friday, Google or Amazon or whoever will say, do you know what, we can add that feature in because they can iterate and they can innovate so much quicker. Now, you suddenly end up with a bit of a soup that we're in at the minute where platform and product differentiation starts to collapse and it becomes really difficult to work out, is there any feature differentiation? Does it matter? Do you want to have a platform which is different to a semi-competitor? And that seems to be collapsing a little bit. And if you just spin through that, maybe you end up with fewer sort of independent concerns there. Maybe you have a platform of platforms. Everyone's continually adding and innovating at the edge. It's really hard to work out where the differences are. Really hard to work out what you should invest upon if you're both an investor and a buy-side practitioner. Do you need to keep, what platforms should you buy next? And I think that really for the next couple of years is a bit of a complication soup because it's going to become really difficult. As we've seen this week, there's 150 vendors all saying we secure AI. Some will be competitive, some will not be competitive at all. But that's what the narrative is. And it becomes really confusing then for the audience. And one last question back to you. So one of the panels that they suggest, it might have been David DeWalt, I can't remember. His question was something, or his comment was something like, will we see $1 trillion cyber company imminently because of AI and because you can just suddenly build, scale, add stuff quickly? I don't know. I personally think not, but I don't want to lead the witness there on voting and whatever else. But do you think we're going to see sort of mega platforms, or do you think we're going to see like 1,000 companies all doing hyper competitive stuff? What's your thoughts there?
Yeah, so a couple of things, right? Because I want to get back to also the light bulb that went off last week that connects very nicely with what you just said, is in terms of the models holding the cards. But let me get back to that really briefly. So a couple of things, right? So my mind immediately goes back to was it Cavellio, right? The founder of RSA, one of the founders of RSA, the company and the conference. And man, this is probably dating ourselves here, Simon, but probably like 2 decades ago, I remember, he's like, there's only going to be, in the next few years, there's only going to be 3 cybersecurity vendors.
Yeah. And one mainframe.
Yeah. Where are we now? Like 20 some years later? Well, we've got a pretty big ecosystem, but we do have these very powerful platforms, right? Getting back to the $1 trillion thing in a second. So the thing is, and I remember one of my old colleagues, Peter Firstbrook, at Gartner. He's been at Gartner for a while, covering endpoint security and various other angles. He was interviewed around that time, and people were like, is Microsoft going to take over? Is like, and he's like, no, like this is actually just kind of the beginning of probably a big, trend in cybersecurity, and that's what we saw. We saw the ecosystem grow. And that's a good thing, right? We didn't have one dominant T-Rex in the dinosaur ecosystem that ate everything and there's nothing left. We actually have a nice dynamic ecosystem, but on the surface, it seems like a lot of that is threatened right now. To the $1 trillion point, I don't think so. I'm going to take a contrarian view on this. And the reason why is, like, we could argue that as markets grow, the TAMs in all these areas grow, and therefore we could say that, yes. So in that instance, I could see if TAMs continue to grow without, having too much geopolitical issues and whatnot. But the world we live in now, just to be realistic, I don't think so. And the reason why is that would be a scary vendor to work with. What is cybersecurity all about? Right? I'm going to remind, the world about this. Right? Reality, integrity, and availability. What is the job of a CISO and a risk officer? Understand your risk and mitigate it. So if you're going to put all of your eggs into a $1 trillion vendor, unless there's like $5 trillion vendors, okay, fine. I'll back away from my comments. But if there's only $1 trillion vendor and there's a lot in the long tail, I just put it simply, dude, like you're not following the core tenets of being a cybersecurity professional and having that, resilience and that availability. If that vendor gets taken out, let's say by a nation state, which could happen, what do you do then? You're relying on a $1 trillion vendor. You could argue, well, worth $1 trillion. They've got the resources to protect themselves. There's no such thing as perfect protection. We realized that as a cybersecurity industry many, many years ago. So again, I'd be okay with a $1 trillion vendor as long as there's others that are around that point. Then that I think is okay. But if there's only one and there's a long tail, history shows that ends up becoming a monopoly, and that's not good for consumers. It's not good for the market, and it certainly won't be good for cybersecurity posture. Love to be challenged on that, but that's just based off of that. But let me just say this really quickly, Simon, on the light bulb point, because it does flow nicely. So the models have the cards. I think you and I agree on that. The light bulb that went off last week, and it was through a number of panels, for a number of just talking to lots of folks, and just over our conversation, Simon, and over the weeks and months, and just using these tools myself. I remember, I'll go back really quickly here. Around 2015, I joined Gartner, and the world was using cloud. You go to RSA, cloud was everywhere. Cloud, like we said earlier. But, we didn't really have good definitions yet of like infrastructure, platform, and software as a service. We knew them intuitively, but everybody just said cloud. And, a couple things I saw happen when I was an analyst and I had the honor of being able to talk to investors, practitioners, buy side, sell side, everybody. Practitioners were reluctant to go to the cloud. Why? Security, privacy, and resilience. They were like universities I talked to that had massive authentication outages and they failed open, right? People were concerned about putting data in the cloud. Can Salesforce read it? Can Amazon read it? Fill in the blank can read it. They were worried about that. Microsoft. So Amazon was obviously one of the first to come up with AWS and really forge what we know of as the cloud market today. But Microsoft, definitely want to credit them because they were one of the first, and correct me if I'm wrong, Simon, but the shared responsibility model. Hey, you sign a contract with Azure, we're going to protect the network, we're going to do this, we're going to do this, we're going to do this. You have responsibility for, your data, your identities, and a number of other things, right? And it depends on infrastructure, software, and platform as a service. They take on different elements. Cool. Once we had that, then clients started getting more confident in like, I can actually use Azure and put critical applications in these cloud environments. I can put my data in those environments, right? I can generate cryptographic keys on-prem and encrypt stuff in the cloud. And they're like, I have ways of doing that. They have cloud HSMs, right? You name it. Like, then we started to see cloud really flourish because we had that. So the light bulb that went off with that in mind, we are in a very similar position, although it's accelerating faster with AI. I believe that the AI platforms themselves, since the models hold the cards, the vendors hold the cards. And so what I think we're going to see is your Anthropics, your OpenAIs. And OpenAI, by the way, joined the FIDO Alliance not too long ago, fairly recently. I discovered that fairly recently as well. So to me, it's saying like OpenAI, like Microsoft and like, and the others are going to say, we need to buy, build, partner, and we need to create that shared responsibility, analog to the cloud in order for the Simon Moffats, the David Mahdis, and other CISOs and CIOs and other IT leaders to truly leverage what we do. And that, again, coming back to the point, Simon, of all these vendors and balkanization and platforms, that also needs to be factored in. Because I think, OpenAI having their own native functionality, if it's going to be like Microsoft, it may not necessarily be best of breed, but it might be excellent for a small and medium business and be like, hey, we'll encrypt everything and we take care of it. That was, to me, if I forget everything else at RSA, to me, I'm walking away from RSA thinking that is probably a safe assumption to assume for every innovator out there, every vendor out there, and every practitioner and investor out there, assume that these AI companies are going to be probably, here's my prediction, they're going to be competing with your CrowdStrikes and they're going to be competing with your Palos and not neck and neck, but in some sense, they're going to take budget away from them. That was my discovery last week. All right, I'll stop there.
I think lots to unpick, which I think we'll probably do in future episodes there. I mean, if you, for a second, zoom out a little bit there and you just think, you continue the cloud analogy, you're probably going to find 4 or 5 or 3 or 4 model, I'd say dominant partners here, an oligopoly of model labs, essentially. So OpenAI and Anthropic, whatever. And they're going to be the big key players. Will they deliver security and privacy stuff? I think some will do that out of the box. You mentioned the FIDO thing there. There's lots of little avenues where you'll start to get some security and some privacy and some authentication authorization out of the box for free from those big model companies. Now, what does that mean? It'll probably make some use cases obsolete. You probably won't pay for certain things in the future, like passwords or whatever. But will they compete with the CrowdStrikes? I don't think they will, but I think the CrowdStrikes, like cloud, you end up being ultra reliant. So you can be a cloud delivered IGA provider, but you're really sitting on AWS. So you're reliant on AWS as your infrastructure layer. So the models become the infrastructure of cyber. Will we have $1 trillion company? I don't think so personally. I think we're going to have hyper competition, and the barrier. You can come away from RSA last week. It would take you about half an hour to go and set up a startup and just go and Claude Code. As you say, the reliability of that is going to be garbage. But back to that features thing, I think you can get things faster, and I think as well, the buy side will probably do a lot of plumbing themselves faster as well. So I think there's multiple sides to it.
I think just on the reliability, but it's also like, again, you think of, okay, this is an extreme example, but it's like, you can build cheap things that get the job done, but they're not everlasting. Or it's like, or you can build a Ferrari that's all made by hand and everything else, and it's going to last. It also needs a lot of TLC, and it's expensive to maintain, but it's like, it can guarantee you, like, overall those vehicles last much longer because they're all handmade, and the QC is much better. QC, when I talk to practitioners, there's some actually in DevOps and some financial institutions, big ones, Simon. They're all like, yeah, like QC is going to be fun in the near future. But hey, well, maybe AI for QC. Anyway, sorry, go ahead.
Let's 100%. That's where I was going actually. Let's wrap this episode up and just say I saw a post today, and I apologize who posted it because I can't remember for the attribution, but it was something like, we're using AI now to find our bugs, right? So you're using that to the pen tests, or using it to do CVE stuff and look for 0 days. Perfect, amazing. But a human is not able to find a bug that the AI code will be generating. So if you spin forward and say, hey, let's have Claude or whoever automate code development, am I going to be able to spot a deficiency there? No, I'm going to need AI to do that for me. So there's a whole set of paradox issues coming and conflicts coming. I think, will it be disruptive? 100%. Will it add value? 100% as well. Will we see $1 trillion company? I don't think so. I think it's a nice strapline thing to talk about. But I think we've definitely spawned multiple issues around, the whole agentic thing, how we're looking to secure AI. We've touched a bit on the B2C sort of impacts a few podcasts back. I think we need to revisit that. I think there's a privacy thing in there as well. I think we also probably need to touch on some of those startups that are coming through and the ones that are delivering some unique value. So there is some exciting companies coming through there. I think we'll. That was a good brain dump. That was a good initial sort of let's get this off our chest. I think there's definitely more to unpick, more to uncover here, Dave. But I guess any last minute quick points before we wrap.
No, I'm excited. Overall, I'm excited and energized as to where this is going. And I think, yeah, you and I have a lot of homework we need to do as in terms of unpacking more of this over the next few episodes. And I do have to say, after 4 weeks of being on the road, it was all energizing and everything else. But I'm on PTO coming up very soon, so
good, nice.
Connect. I'm not going on link. I'll do some LinkedIn posts this week. That is it. And then when we get back, it's like let's get back and tackle this
digital detox, digital and travel detox. That's what you need. Yeah. That's good stuff, Tim. No, I think that's perfectly reasonable. I think that's some good insight there. I think it was a really interesting conference. Like, absolutely, there's always hype. A few years back it was zero trust, then it was whatever. Things change and evolve, and obviously, I think it'll be interesting to see what it'll be like next year or the year after as to how, I guess, some of our predictions, if you like, see if they have solidified. But for sure, Dave, thank you for taking a bit of time out. Go and have a digital detox and a bit of a, I don't know, chamomile tea or something, and put the laptop in the freezer like Joey did in Friends with his scary book. He go and stick it in the deep freeze somewhere.
Exactly.
All right, Dave, thanks. Go and do that. I think obviously it was brilliant as always. Lots to unpack, which we will continue to do so. This has been episode 71 of the Analyst Brief podcast. Thank you for listening. Thank you, Dave, for sharing his insights, and we will see you next time.